Now out in cinemas is 28 Years Later, the third in the series that came to a standstill back in 2007, with 28 Weeks Later. That film had performed well enough at the box office and especially on DVD, though critically not as well as the first film, but plans were in motion for a third, but due to a rights issue things were stalled. Now after 23 years since 28 Days Later, director Danny Boyle and writer Alex Garland have returned to the franchise they both started in 2002, with plans to create a new trilogy, with 3 and 4 shot back to back. Danny and Alex wanted to see how a world would rebuild itself after an apocalypse. What would the infected look like after 28 years? How have these sick people managed to survive? They need to eat and drink, so how has the virus evolved and mutated? The original film went with the unique approach of shooting on the Canon XL1 digital camcorder, which was far from high definition and very much stuck in a standard definition world, giving the film this found footage style, and gave the filmmakers a chance to shoot quickly, especially the famous sequence as we see Cillian Murphy walk around a completely empty London, which blew people away as London is always crazy busy, and seeing it empty was quite an accomplishment. The critics' response to 28 Years Later has been very positive, with Robbie Collin of the Daily Telegraph giving the film 5 out of 5, saying, "An unholy hybrid of a Canterbury Tale and Cannibal Holocaust, which Boyle was perhaps uniquely placed to pull off, and which stands as his finest film since 2008's Slumdog Millionaire," and Empire magazine awarded it 4 out of 5, saying, "The sequel we needed is both the film you expect and the one you don't. There's blood but also real guts and brain and heart." For the production of 28 Years Later, Danny said he loves to embrace technology. It allows them to open up opportunities and ideas in the filmmaking process, and he will go down a similar path to how he shot the original, and made use of the iPhone 15 Max and drones for many of the exteriors. The film takes on a 2.76:1 aspect ratio, a tad wider than the usual blockbusters with a similar ratio, and they even deployed a bullet time rig for a number of sequences. With funding from Sony Pictures, this British production makes use of locations in the north of England, with a large chunk shot in Yorkshire, and with additional parts shot in Somerset in the southwest of the UK. So for the film's plot, which is of course set 28 years later since the original outbreak, the UK has been quarantined, the rest of Europe has managed to contain the rage virus, no one is allowed to leave the UK as military boats monitor the coastline to make sure there are no attempts from the locals to escape. Not even Snake Plissken would be allowed to leave if he entered the country. Up in the Highlands, a settlement have taken residence on a small island, which they have fortified to keep the raging zombies out, with a tidal causeway used as a way for the townsfolk to cross at certain times of the day. Jamie, played by Aaron Taylor-Johnson, and his son Spike, played by Alfie Williams, leave the town to go to the mainland, which is a sort of rites of passage for the young to prove themselves against the zombies. Spike is encouraged to make his first kill. They encounter a new type of infected, an alpha male, which is tough to bring down, and some super fat ones who crawl on the ground. After a pretty hairy moment, they escape from an attack and make their way home. Spike's mother Isla, played by Jodie Comer, has been unwell for a long time, and due to the lack of doctors, Spike takes her to the mainland in search of Dr. Ian Kelson, played by Ralph Fiennes, who his father Jamie mentioned was completely nuts, but Spike believes he can help. I had seen a short preview of the film as they had re-released 28 Days Later for a one-off showing in the UK a couple of months ago, and it included a sneak preview before the film. And from what I saw, I was very impressed, so upon seeing the film I can comfortably say it's a great sequel, and certainly far better than 28 Weeks Later, which honestly wasn't difficult to beat. I'm not sure if this is better than the original. I would have to give this sequel another watch to be fully confident, as 28 Days Later had London as a setting, which provides more of a visually interesting backdrop compared to the countryside, but the dense forest does provide this claustrophobic trapping of being surrounded by the infected. With the UK being cut off from the rest of the world, the remaining people are stuck in this post-apocalyptic backdrop, very much like The Last of Us or even Mad Max, as everyone is now out to fend for themselves and their own interests. With Danny Boyle back behind the camera, the film is striking throughout with fantastic compositions and visual flair to the chase sequences. The visual storytelling is slick, everything is shot with a lot of wide angles for the audience to take in a huge amount of land that is now littered with the infected and wild animals. The editing is frantic and experimental in places, making for some trippy sequences. The score is really effective throughout, making for an emotional punch in the third act that really blew me away in combination with the beautiful visuals. It was one of the highlights of the film for me. As this is very much in the horror genre, is the film scary? Well, not really. I am pretty useless with horror and jump easily, but this film didn't make me jump. It's certainly gory in places and bloody. It's tense for sure, but nothing too shocking or disturbing. Well, apart from one scene which I won't go into. But the lack of a proper jump out of your seat scary moment doesn't take away any of the enjoyment I had watching it. The performances are stellar, with Ralph Fiennes clearly enjoying the part of the eccentric doctor, who has a caring warmth to his character. Newcomer Alfie Williams, who is essentially the lead, turns in a fine performance as he keeps it together to look after his confused mother, who Jodie plays and sells effortlessly. For those who are fans of Aaron Taylor-Johnson, and for those who aren't, he is only in the first act as his son Spike takes over for the rest of the film. The first act is certainly the most intense, as many critics online have discussed how the film opens, with kids watching the Teletubbies, and all hell breaks loose. It's nuts and a fantastic opening. As we get to the middle act, things calm down, but it never gets dull. The introduction of the Swedish soldier provides the film with hilarious banter between him and Spike. It had me and the audience in fits of laughter. 28 Days Later had the unique selling point of being a British horror film on a large scale, and captured something we hadn't seen before. The centre of London was never used to my knowledge in such a way, and seeing it completely empty blew my mind. With these type of movies, you're often confined to an American backdrop. Seeing London in a complete mess was a huge selling point at the time. The zombie genre had disappeared for a number of years, but Resident Evil in 1996 had brought life back into the old corpse, and filmmakers were excited again. 28 Days Later wouldn't feature zombies in the traditional sense. They were full of rage, and they would run at top speed and not stroll around at a slow pace. Despite the changes, it still fell into the same category. Shaun of the Dead 2 years later would fully enforce the return of the zombie. The sequel 28 Weeks Later would try to recapture the qualities of the first film, but due to the first one's success, the studio clearly wanted to appeal to an American audience, and of course the Americans get involved in securing London, thus it lost some of its appeal. The original film worked so well because it was very much a British take on the genre, and what comes with that is the British sensibilities and perspective on the horror subject. Though 28 Weeks Later does have an intense opening sequence, it does begin to falter as the story plays out, and I haven't had much of a desire to go back to it. As Danny Boyle and Alex Garland are setting up a new trilogy, the film does have the slight problem of the third act not having a final wrap-up, as it's setting up the next story. You do have a start, middle and an end for sure, but you do get a great sense there is more story to tell and it comes to an end. It's not a major problem, but just something to be aware of. What appealed to me the most was having Danny Boyle return to the horror genre and continue the series he kickstarted back in 2002 with Alex Garland. As we all know, the horror genre is oversaturated, with a lot of films that are just designed for people to die in crazy elaborate ways, or just endless sequels repeating the same formula over and over again. 28 Years Later is thankfully a smart take on the zombie and post-apocalyptic genre that doesn't fall into the familiar trappings and provides a new take on the subject, and most important of all, has something interesting to say, instead of just having characters running away from zombies and shooting them. I highly recommend 28 Years Later. It's just unfortunate it's been so long for Danny Boyle to return to the horror genre, but thankfully, it's been worth the wait. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to click the like button and hit the bell to be notified of my latest reviews. Big thanks to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain access to exclusive videos and take part in Q&As, follow the link below.